I would now like to call on Dr. Philip Orumwense, who will be giving a presentation on participatory democracy and good governance. But before Philip gives his presentation, I would quickly just go through his bio. Dr. Philip Orumwense is the IT Director of Highways England. He's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supplies. He heads up the Information and Technology Group at Highways England, where he's also a Commercial and Procurement Director. He leads the delivery of commercial and procurement capability and leadership for all IT infrastructure, software, hardware, service, change, and operational technology for the delivery of Highways England programs and services. He previously headed up the digital platform programs and applications category at the Department for Works and Pensions, where he was also commercial director for the Universal Credit Program. He's engaged on several complex change programs, developing sourcing solutions and delivering end-to-end category and management services across a broad range of digital and technology categories. I will leave Philip to give more details about himself.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for the invitation to share some insights on this topic. Just by way of background, for 17 years, I was a senior civil servant with Her Majesty's government in the UK. And as part of that, I was a high-risk government gateway review team lead, which means that I have reviewed, in terms of corporate governance for the UK government, several high-risk, high-profile projects, including the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, including the UK Business Bank, and a range, Ministry of Justice, and a range of high-profile projects in the UK. So I think that gives me some kind of credibility to talk about good governance, not just within the UK, but also drawing some comparisons with what happens in Nigeria. And for good measure, I studied politics at the University of Benin in the 80s. So I do have a good understanding of the political implications for governance. So this afternoon, I'm going to try and build on some of the things that some of the speakers have talked about. I'm going to start by contextualizing this conversation in terms of what governance means. And that could mean a departure from some of the definitions that previous speakers have talked about. I'm going to extend that to look at how has it gone so bad for us in Africa, in Nigeria, and then draw some relative comparisons to what happens within the UK. And then I'm going to go on to look at presenting a framework of what governance really should be. And then from there, draw some relative evidence from what we have seen in the past and what we're currently seeing. And then we can then look at what more can we do by way of recommendations on what we should be doing to try and improve corporate governance in Africa and indeed in Nigeria. And then lastly, I will draw this together by identifying the 4 lines of defense, which we have usually adopted in the UK in governing most of what we do across the UK government. So to commence with, I'm not going to go over most of what colleagues have said. We've talked about governance being an act of decision-making and decision implementation, which is absolutely fine. But to extend that, it's also about the exercise of authority. It's not so much about decision-making, it is about decision-making. It's how that authority is exercised. For government, that includes, selecting those people who are representing, the actors, the people who play out that instrument of power. Is the monitoring of the exercise and the judgments that they make. It's replacing those people who makes those decisions. But more crucially, is the capacity for governments to effectively formulate and implement policies, whilst recognizing the needs of the citizens and in the context of governing the economic and social interactions among them. And that includes the current conversations we're having globally around inclusion, around diversity, around Black Lives Matters, and you name it. All of those comes into what I see, as corporate governance. But for Nigeria, and let's be absolutely clear, there's a historic antecedent that informs where we are and how we got to where we are. And that cannot be divorced away from the current ethno-religious and political crisis that the country faces. By that I mean the Fulani herdsmen insurgents, by that I mean the Boko Haram insurgents, by that I mean the extensive proliferation of religious thought leadership across the country. All of these are interconnected in terms of corporate governance. It also means for us, though, that we need to begin to ask some serious questions about corporate governance or good governance in Nigeria, especially in terms of the politics of deprivation, corruption, nepotism, mismanagement of resources, which appears to become the core principles that overrides all issues of accountability, transparency, and responsibility that every government should subscribe to. Tenets that underpins the UK civil service structure, tenets that underpins how government within the UK disburses its accountabilities. Those are tenets that we've taken for granted, especially in Nigeria and elsewhere in Africa. So the question for me then is it possible to have good governance without good leadership? And of course, underpinning that is also good followership. Whilst it is logical that, good leadership is, good governance is derived from good leadership, we have to ensure that that leadership composition reflects the boundaries of the people that they serve. And for me, the followership is just as guilty as the people who are leading them, because of the enormous demand in terms of nepotism, in terms of what's in it for me, that beclouds the judgments of the leaders who we've given the responsibility to govern our activities. And then lastly, on the context, the Nigerian governance problem statements for me, informs the unwillingness or inability of our leaders and indeed their followers to rise to their responsibility, to live to the challenges of coactive and proactive actions or reactions, which are the hallmarks of true leadership and followership. For me, that's the disconnect. Whereas in the UK, there is that constant reminder of the responsibilities that our governing parties have for us. So how did it get so bad for us in Africa? For those of us who are schooled in Nigerian and African politics, the early years of independence kind of brought in a huge swathe of accountability, good performance. And for some decades now, especially going back to the early 70s, we began to see, especially for me, growing up as a young man in Benin, the structural adjustment programs. I've read up on several corporate governance literature where most of the Southeast Asian companies turned a blind eye to the IMF and their loan agreements because of the conditionalities that they drove. Looking back on what happened in Nigeria at the time, our signing up to the structural adjustment program, we more or less sold our souls to them. For me, that's an exemplified example of poor governance in terms of not really understanding that we are mortgaging the future of our children and our children's children at the behest of immediate gains. And that led to huge reduced growth rates, declining agricultural production, stagnating manufacturing, rising imports, and rapidly expanding external debts. All of these, for me, are connected to good governance. The African continent have had several leadership unrest, coups, civil unrest, ethnic and religious strife, political corruption, widespread bureaucratic corruption alongside administrative inefficiencies. Again, these are evidence of bad governance that have beclouded, the African continent. Added to that is the ineffective and inefficient, lack of transparency, lack of responsiveness to the people, lack of accountability for our leaders' actions, inequitability and exclusive rights of the elite to participatory democracy. It's shameful that for a country that has so much intellectual capability and capacity, we're unable to effectively engage with the thought leaders, people who can generate that effective democratic collateral that can get us to where we need to be. All that does is drive oppression, suppression, intimidation, hunger, poverty, unemployment, strife, lawlessness, economic deprivation, and political thuggery. And for those of us from Edo State, what's currently happening with the governorship elections really drives this home in terms of the extent to which our leaders have compromised good governance for their immediate and selfish gains. How does this come together? For me, essentially, taking the Nigerian example, for instance, and bringing it back to the UK, we have an unstable foundation because of bad governance and corruption. Now, within the UK, we have economic institutions, including banks and financial institutions, including non-governmental organizations who are able to hold our leaders to account. We have political institutions in terms of various political parties. We have the institutions of government in terms of number 10, in terms of the parliament, and a range of other political institutions and lobby groups that can hold our governments to account. And then we also have social institutions, which is the fabric upon which our society is based. Now, these institutions regularly call the governments to account, either directly or through their lobby groups. And then we then have the core leadership. Now, the core leadership here in the UK is not just the political leaders. The institutions of the civil service constitute that cadre of direct and fundamental strategic leadership that provides the directions that this country faces. Now, I was a senior civil service for 17 years. In that time, I had more authority to make policies. I led the financial inclusion policy within the UK. I'm not a politician, right? So I worked with ministers, secretaries of state to determine how we allocate funds, how we begin to open up our financial institutions for the unbanked, for people who were financially excluded, right? Now, in Nigeria, would that be possible for a civil servant to have a role in determining how people feel financially included and to give that opportunity for a broader canvas of people to participate in our democratic decision-making? We are able to, as civil servants, hold ministers, secretaries of state to account for their actions. We're also able to discharge and dispose the funds for them. Now, I have a portfolio of over £2 billion annual spend that I have responsibilities for. No minister, no secretary of state can direct me of how to spend that money. For me, that's good governance because they are there to give us the ideas about their political manifesto. The civil service is there to help them articulate the translation of those policies into actions and to find and disburse the funds that's associated with it. There's a gap in terms of where we are in the UK and where the Nigerian political system is currently at. Now, so what's the evidence? What I've just said means that translates to our politicians, our decision makers, our political masters in Nigeria being able to do whatever they want to do, being able to take $170,000 in cash to the United States if they so wish. Whereas here in the UK, my ministers would not have any access to that money. That money sits with the with the Bank of England, and I can draw that against it, not the ministers can. It also means that there's maladministration, people using public money to fund political party, campaigns and the rest of it. It can't happen here because of accountability. We are able to audit time and time again how income are being generated by each of the political parties within the UK. and that's traceable to the source. And where there's an issue, someone is brought to question. So there are things there that I think there's a connection between good leadership and good governance. You cannot disconnect the two. And therefore, I feel, and my contention is this, that Nigerian leaders have the capacity to influence public policies to make a difference for all its citizens. But they fail to do so because of their primary goal of assuming leadership and self-enrichment. I also contend that leading a country involves making policies and finding solutions to problems, ensuring that the polity and the guiding principles for societal prosperity rest with those leaders. And I came across this today, just about an hour or two before this presentation, and it just caught my attention that in 1984, the current president of Nigeria was talking about middlemen, blaming middlemen for the poor Nigerian economy. We are in 2020, some 36 years later, the same leaders are still blaming, middlemen for rising food prices. There's a disconnect there. There's something fundamentally flawed in the fabric of our policy making in Nigeria that needs to be addressed. And it's not going to be addressed by the men in power. It's going to be institutionalized. The civil service, the public service have to have a role in policy determination, in driving, bridging, and bringing together that fabric of our society that can hold our leaders to account. That accountability is simply not there. So going on, what can we do to remediate this position? Now, I've said I'm a civil servant, and because I am, I can only talk about what I know. I'm not a politician, but I feel I have enormous power to be able to make and influence policies for the good of the UK citizen taxpayers. It was pleasing to hear Francis Workedy talk about remuneration, resources, risk management, shareholder value, sustainability. All of those were music to my ears. He also talked about the UK Corporate Governance Code. Again, that was music to my ears. Most of us here is derived from that UK Corporate Governance Codes, which all civil service are bound by, right? So there's impartiality, there's professional integrity, there's creating an inspired and engaged workforce, there's confidence in our actions. We're empowered as public service, servants to uphold the virtues of good governance. What that means is you have those checks and balances that are able to hold those politicians to account for the commitments they've made to our citizens. It also means that I'm highly paid. I get paid more than what our prime minister gets paid within the UK. Now, you can't say that in Nigeria, right? I haven't got any of the trappings. I haven't got a driver. I haven't got a gardener. I haven't got 4 cars given to me. I drive myself everywhere I go to, right? So those are some of the basic housekeeping principles that keeps accountability front and center of our policy making within the UK. So we need to be able to drive and improve accountability, openness and transparency in determination and delivery of public good and public services. Why is that important? Now, for me to be able to spend a penny of our taxpayers' money, I have to be open and transparent. I have to equality of treatment for everyone, to give an opportunity for anyone who have the capability to bid and compete for those services. So we can account for where those monies are going to. We also need to look at all forms of corrupt practices and related vices, and also to ensure that we bring defaulters to account. Now, the last time I went to Nigeria, I went to Iyamo specifically to see Oshomole's, the ex-governor of Edo State's assets. Now, I couldn't believe my eyes. You would think you were in Hollywood. For a governor, how was he able to amass that amount of money to build such a huge edifice and investment? No one is holding them to account. In the UK, when you come into office as a politician, your earnings, your income, your assets are assetized. The inventory is taken. When you leave, they are taken again to just baseline the progression that you've made. If you're unable to account for the additional assets that you've created, there's what we call the Proceeds of Crime Act that will be invested in you. We will take and liquidate all of those things. None of those things happen in Africa or indeed in Nigeria. And I think it's about time we start learning from people who have, honed some of these practices. I shared with someone the other day I've taken delegations from Namibia, from Zimbabwe, from Namibia, from Thailand, from Canada, from Australia, from various countries to shadow how we run the UK civil service. Now, I've never seen any delegations from Nigeria to look at how effective the civil service can be done. And I think the UK exemplifies the independence of the civil service. And I think there's some lessons that we can learn from them. Right, to move the conversations on, leadership also should be responsive to the yearnings and aspirations of the people, and therefore they should be made accountable. We need to strengthen the political, economic, social, and other institutions of governance. And it's heartening to hear Francis talk about that. It's heartening to hear Dr. Higiamuso talk about that as well. That's crucially important for us to succeed. There should be, a sound, economically driven projects, programs, and laws. I think one of the questions or comments on the question board earlier on talks about, do we apply project management governance into good governance? Absolutely. It's key that we take governance as a systematic way of delivering solutions, programs, and projects. And there are lessons that will persist through all of those conversations. But more crucially for me, though, is for us to begin to find a way to adopt rules and regulations in accordance with the procedures that are set out by law, and to ensure impartiality in its enforcement. By doing so, we'll be able to ensure that corruption and nepotism are minimized. For me, this is the biggest bugbear for a Nigerian who was born and brought up in Benin. If I had lived in Benin, I probably would never have achieved the enormity of contributions that are made to the UK society. And therefore, we need to find a way to limit the extent to which our nepotic attitudes preordinate the less intelligent over the more intelligent. We also need to ensure that the views of minorities are taken into account. Again, competing as a young man doing my JAM growing up, there was the federal quota, which meant that even if I had the highest entrance examination, I might not get to university because of the federal quota. We need to be able to harness the powers that are. And then the voices of the most vulnerable in our society should be heard. We must become much more responsive to the present and future needs of citizens, but crucially to ensure the independence of the civil service. And just lastly, before I go, we need to find a way to contextualize the religious orthodoxy that is now becoming the norm within the Nigerian polity. Whilst there's a place for religion, there's also a place for societal transformation that allows people to exercise their free will and judgment rather than being superimposed by religious leaders. And I think if we're able to bring all of this together, take some lessons from advanced societies that have perfected the act of governance and bring some of those learnings to help us improve what we're trying to build in Africa and Nigeria, we stand a chance of succeeding. I hope that was useful.